My father suspended me in front of the entire executive team. Just stood there in that conference room and told me I couldn't come back until I apologized to my sister. Brittany was sitting right there, pretending to look hurt, but I caught that little smirk. The one she always wore when she knew she'd gotten away with something. Nobody said a word. 20 people in that room, and not one of them spoke up. They just sat there, staring at their laptops or their coffee cups, anywhere but at me. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at my father and said, "All right." 2 words. That's all it took to start the collapse of everything he'd built. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. I'm Kristi, and this is the story of how I finally stopped being reasonable. I grew up thinking silence meant peace. Took me 20-something years to figure out it actually meant something else. It meant some people's voices mattered more than others. Brittany figured that out way before I did. She was maybe 10 when she cried during a school project argument. The teacher hadn't even finished explaining what happened before my dad swooped in, full protective mode. Brittany walked out with new supplies and a pat on the head. I walked out with the same torn poster board and a reminder to be reasonable. Reasonable. That became my whole identity, and I didn't even realize I was accepting it. The day my college acceptance letter came, I held that thick envelope with both hands. I'd worked so hard for it, late nights, early mornings, scholarships, the whole thing. My dad opened it in the kitchen, skimmed the first line, nodded once, and set it down next to the stack of junk mail. He didn't even look at the second page. 10 minutes later, Brittany came home with an engagement ring. Suddenly the house was full of people, champagne glasses everywhere, phone calls to relatives I hadn't heard from in years. My acceptance letter disappeared under a pile of party napkins before the night was over. That's when I started to understand accomplishment meant less than spectacle in our family. And Brittany was always better at putting on a show. When Mom died, everything got worse. She'd been the buffer, you know? The one who noticed when I was stressed or when I'd been up too late working. She kept my dad's blind spots from swallowing the rest of us whole. I remember the last real conversation I had with her. She was tired, sick already but trying not to show it. We were sitting in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, and she looked at me with this sad kind of knowing in her eyes. "Kristi," she said quietly, using that tone that meant she was about to say something important. "You don't always have to be the strong one. Sometimes you can just be." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought being strong was the only option I had. Without her, Brittany had zero resistance. She could do whatever she wanted. The family business made it all crystal clear. I built the development department from basically nothing, a tiny room with flickering fluorescent lights, into an entire floor of engineers who actually trusted me. I knew every detail of every project we delivered. Every feature, every timeline, every system we'd rebuilt from scratch. I didn't brag about it. I didn't need to. Brittany took a different approach. She got really good at promising things she didn't understand. 4-week timelines when the work needed 12. Budgets that didn't account for testing or the fact that people can't work 20-hour days forever. And my dad always backed her up. "Brittany knows the clients," he'd say. "Just make it work, Kristi." So we did. We always did. My team would stay late, eyes red from staring at screens. I'd stay later, fixing the problems, rewriting schedules, taking the blame for things that were never my fault. My dad never asked how we pulled it off. He just kept saying the same thing: "Your sister handles relationships. You handle the rest." I stopped arguing. Instead, I started documenting everything. Timelines, notes, risk assessments, all of it. Written proof that nobody wanted to read, but I kept anyway. At first, I told myself it was just good practice. Professional diligence. But deep down, I think I knew. I was building a case I hoped I'd never need to use. The project right before my suspension showed me what I'd been refusing to see for years. Brittany made another impossible promise. My dad approved it before I even saw the email. When I pointed out the numbers literally didn't work, he gave me that look, the same one from when I was a kid asking why things weren't fair. Patient. Dismissive. completely certain I'd just adjust myself to fit whatever he needed. I tried one more time. I pulled up the spreadsheets, showed him the resource gaps, explained how the timeline would burn out my entire team. "We've done impossible before," he said, already turning away. "You'll figure it out, Kristi." That's when it hit me. He wasn't asking me to figure it out. He was telling me to absorb the cost of Brittany's incompetence. Again. Standing outside that conference room, something clicked in my head. Simple and sharp. I'd spent my entire life being reasonable for people who never intended to actually see me. That was the day I learned my real place in this family. And the day I quietly started planning my exit. After my dad suspended me, the hallway felt colder. People moved out of my way, but not out of respect, out of discomfort. Like standing too close might pull them into the mess of a family fight nobody wanted to acknowledge. I got to my floor and saw a printed memo taped by the elevators. New project chart. New chain of command. Brittany's name sat right at the top of the column I'd built from nothing. Her title in bold. Mine missing completely. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. My phone started buzzing. Messages from my engineers. "Are you okay? Do we still follow your timeline? They're saying a lot upstairs." I turned the screen face down and let it vibrate. My dad called a few minutes later. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked if I understood the optics. "Just keep the peace," he said, using that same tone from when I was 12 and he was explaining why Brittany got the last piece of cake. Family comes first. Family. The word felt hollow coming from him. When I hung up, Brittany was already standing in my doorway. She didn't knock, just leaned against the frame like she owned the place. Because my dad had made sure she did. "You can end this, Kristi," she said, all gracious and sweet. "Just apologize." She brushed some lint off her sleeve, checked her reflection in my monitor, and smiled at herself. Small. Confident. Certain she'd already won. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her directly. I just felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not grief. Something steadier. Like a door locking. She waited, expecting me to fight back so she could perform her way out of it. Instead, I picked up my bag, closed my laptop, and stood up. "That's it?" she asked. I nodded. "All right." I closed my office door and heard the latch click. Such a small sound, but it marked a line I'd never crossed before. The room felt different now. The glass walls, the framed degrees, the quiet hum of computers, everything I'd built, everything they'd taken for granted. I pulled my hair back and opened my desk drawer. Then I started packing. First came the documents, project scopes, risk assessments, notes from meetings nobody remembered I'd attended. Budget breakdowns. Timelines I'd written at midnight with cold coffee next to my keyboard. I lined up each folder on my desk, checking dates, matching signatures. Calm. Precise. Just the truth. There was something almost meditative about it. Each folder a piece of evidence. Each date stamp a moment where I'd carried weight nobody acknowledged. I wrapped my degrees in tissue paper, sliding each frame into a box. Every award followed, proof of work my dad never acknowledged but the company couldn't deny. The walls went blank. Cold. Like they were already preparing for whoever came next. My laptop kept chiming. Messages from my team, from other departments, from people who'd sat through that meeting and pretended not to see what happened. I turned it face down. Silence was cleaner. I opened a new document. Not to analyze or defend, just to finalize. A resignation letter. Short and quiet. No emotion. No accusations. Just the formal end of a role I'd already outgrown. Then came the real work. I opened the shared drive and started compiling everything. Project histories. Resource allocations. Contract notes. Every single instance where Brittany had made promises without checking one technical constraint. I didn't add commentary. I didn't adjust the tone. I just collected what already existed. 2 hours passed. When the file was done, it wasn't just documentation, it was a mirror. My fingers hovered over the send button. Not from doubt, from precision. Timing mattered. I sent it to the board, the department heads, the clients whose expectations had been warped by Brittany's promises. One subject line, project documentation and status overview. No drama, just information. My phone rang within 60 seconds. The company lawyer, then a board member, then 2 clients. I didn't answer any of them. I kept packing. Pens, notebooks, the mug my team gave me last winter. The only thing I left was a prototype from a project we'd saved 3 years ago, 40 hours of work in 2 days, enough coffee to last a month, and Unity no executive ever noticed. I set it back on the shelf and left it there. Brittany appeared in the doorway again, breathless this time. What did you do? Her voice bounced off the glass. She looked around, empty walls, open boxes, my desk cleared. Kristi, you didn't tell me. I didn't answer. I placed the last folder in my bag and closed it with a quiet click. She stepped inside like she was crossing enemy territory. You can't leave. Dad won't allow it. You're making a mistake. I slid my laptop into its case. No, I said. I'm correcting one. Her mouth opened, ready to argue, to twist everything into some story where she stayed the hero. But she stopped when she saw my completely empty desk. For a moment, she was actually silent. I walked past her without waiting for permission. The hallway smelled like burnt coffee and copy machine ink, the same smell that had followed me for years. Every step felt deliberate, clean. By the time I reached the elevator, I'd already messaged my lawyer and responded to a recruiter I'd turned down months ago out of loyalty. My dad called again. His voicemail was urgent. Kristi, we need to talk. Do not do anything rash. But nothing about this was rash. The plan was already done. I got home as evening light filled my living room. The house was quiet, warm, mine. I set my bag on the dining table and opened it. Documents in clean stacks, contracts, payments, timelines, emails. The order was soothing. The truth undeniable. One final folder held the resignation letter. I took a slow breath, pressed pen to paper, and signed my name with a steady hand. Kristi Rollins. Not Kristi Rollins, daughter of the CEO. Not Kristi Rollins, Brittany's sister. Just Kristi Rollins. I closed the portfolio and ran my fingers along the leather edge. A ritual. Sealing something irreversible. In the silence, nothing felt wrong. There was just clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing to fix anything. I was preparing to walk away. I arrived at the office just before 9 the next morning. The lobby was buzzing, whispers behind coffee cups, glances that scattered when I looked up. Someone held the elevator for me, then pretended they hadn't. The executive floor felt tight, like the air hadn't settled since yesterday. My dad's assistant stood near the door, clutching a folder. He wants to see you, Miss Rollins. Her voice trembled. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the conference room. The door was open. My dad stood at the far end of the table, shoulders stiff, eyes red from a sleepless night. The company lawyer sat beside him, laptop open, face pale. A paralegal typed quietly in the corner, recording everything. Brittany hovered by the window, arms crossed, looking like she'd eaten something sour. Nobody spoke until I sat down. My dad tried first. Kristi, we can work this out. Strained authority. Let's be rational. I set my portfolio on the table. The soft thud cut through the room. I'm here to finalize my resignation. The lawyer inhaled sharply. Brittany blinked, first crack in her confidence. My dad's jaw tightened. You don't need to do this. I opened the portfolio, lifted the resignation letter, and laid it on the table like placing the final card in a finished game. Suspension without documented cause triggers severance terms, I said. Section 12 covers immediate vesting. The lawyer nodded. He'd already read my contract. His eyes told me he knew exactly what this meant and that I had every legal right to do it. My dad blinked slowly, realizing he'd approved every clause himself 4 years ago. Back when he thought I'd never actually use them. Back when he assumed I'd always just stay. Brittany stepped forward. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion, Kristi. All you had to do was apologize. I slid a second folder across the table. The documentation from last night. Timelines, contracts, payments, email chains. Everything clean. Everything factual. Everything she'd pretended didn't exist. The lawyer hesitated, then opened it. His face drained. This is extensive, he whispered. Brittany leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes widened with every page. You can't send this to clients. I already did, I said. Her hand froze midair. What? My dad's voice cracked. What? I sent documentation to the board and project stakeholders. Status updates. Accuracy matters. The room dropped into hollow silence. Brittany looked at my dad, desperate. Dad, say something. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the stack of documents, the mirror he'd refused to face for years. Every promise she'd made without understanding. Every impossible deadline. Every budget that didn't account for reality. All of it, laid out in black and white. You blindsided us, he said quietly. No, I replied. I revealed what you ignored. The lawyer cleared his throat. Legally, she acted within her rights. Nothing here violates confidentiality. These are internal project documents, and the contract terms are binding. Brittany's voice rose. So she gets to walk away after ruining everything? I closed the portfolio. I didn't ruin anything. I stopped absorbing the cost. My dad pressed his palms flat on the table. We need you for the Hegseth account, Kristi. We can't deliver what Brittany promised. She didn't understand the requirements. He stopped, catching himself too late. Brittany turned toward him, stunned. You're blaming me? He looked at her the way people look at burning buildings, realizing too late they should have checked the foundation. For years, he'd protected her from consequences. Now those consequences were standing in the room with all of us, and there was nowhere left to hide. I stood. This isn't my problem anymore. I've accepted another position. Brittany let out a hollow laugh, sharp and brittle. Who would hire you after this? The lawyer closed the folder with trembling fingers. Anyone who values competence. Nobody breathed. I reached for my portfolio. My dad stepped forward like he might stop me, then dropped his hand halfway. We can still fix this, Kristi, he said softly. You don't have to leave. I met his eyes. Finally level. Finally clear. I already left. I walked out of that conference room, past Brittany's stunned silence, past the lawyer's shock, past my dad's dying hope. I didn't look back. The elevator doors slid shut with a quiet hum. And just like that, the system I'd tried so hard to hold together started collapsing, without me lifting a single finger. I left the building without checking if anyone watched. The air outside felt lighter, like the weight I'd carried for years finally realized it had no host anymore. My phone buzzed once more as I reached my car. A text from one of my senior engineers, Derek, who'd been with me since the beginning of the department. Kristi, whatever you need, we've got your back. 3 more messages came in quick succession. Then 5 more. My entire team reaching out one by one. Not asking what happened. Just offering support. That's when I realized something I'd missed in all those years of holding things together. I hadn't just built systems and processes. I'd built relationships with people who actually saw my work, who respected what I did, who knew the difference between promises and delivery. They weren't texting out of obligation. They were reaching out because they'd watched me carry impossible loads, and they knew I'd finally put them down. At home, the light through my windows was warm, softening everything. I set my portfolio on the table, not with finality, but with quiet completion. I fed Charlie, my dog. His nails tapped across the hardwood, ordinary and grounding. He looked up at me with those simple, trusting eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders relax. I poured water, held the glass with both hands the way I used to hold coffee at the office. The habit surprised me, carried from a life I didn't owe anything to anymore. That night, I didn't check emails. I didn't replay conversations. I didn't brace for fallout. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was clean. Around 10, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Kristi Rollins? A woman's voice, direct and professional. This is Angela Turner from the Hegseth account. I received your documentation this afternoon. I wanted to call personally. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I understand if you have concerns. Concerns? She cut me off, but her tone wasn't angry. I'm calling to thank you. We've been asking for realistic timelines for months. Brittany kept assuring us everything was on track, but we knew something wasn't adding up. This documentation finally shows us the truth. I didn't know what to say. We're terminating the contract with your father's company, she continued. But I'd like to discuss bringing you on as an independent consultant. If you're interested. I sat down slowly. I just accepted a position with. I know. I already spoke with your new employer. They're open to a contract arrangement. Think about it, Kristi. We'll pay fairly for realistic timelines over false promises. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room for a long time. The truth I'd been afraid to share, the documentation I thought might burn bridges, had actually built new ones. In the morning, I dressed without rushing. Clothes that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. On the drive to my meeting with the new company, the skyline looked almost unfamiliar, like I was seeing it for the first time instead of escaping from it. Their office was bright, open, filled with the easy sound of people who didn't tiptoe around tension. When the hiring manager introduced me to the team, nobody evaluated me against someone else's status. They just shook my hand and smiled. One of them asked about my experience with system architecture. Another mentioned a problem they'd been trying to solve for weeks. They weren't looking for someone to absorb impossible demands. They were looking for someone who actually knew what they were doing. Kristi, the hiring manager, said quietly during a break. We heard about what happened. Not the family drama, the documentation you sent out. The Hegseth group reached out to us for references. That kind of integrity is rare. I realized then that the truth I'd been so careful to document hadn't just protected me. It had proven my worth to people who valued it. Later, standing by windows overlooking the city, I thought about that acceptance letter buried under party napkins. The late nights fixing impossible timelines. The countless moments I stayed silent because silence was expected. And then I thought about the empty desk. The resignation letter. The portfolio placed on the table without drama. Each act simple, precise. Mine. My phone buzzed. A message from my dad. Just 3 words, we need you. I looked at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He didn't need me. He needed someone to fix what he'd ignored. Those were 2 very different things. Leaving wasn't a loss. It was an opening, one I created with nothing more than facts, restraint, and a willingness to stop rescuing people who confused my competence for obligation. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like erasure. It felt like freedom. In the end, I learned something simple. Silence isn't surrender. It's a choice. A place where you decide what enters your life and what never will again. Walking away didn't break me. It returned me to myself. The version of me that Mom saw when she said I didn't always have to be strong. The version that could just be. If you've ever stood in a room where your worth was treated like background noise, let this remind you, your life doesn't need their permission to change. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth and the courage to walk away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can say is just 2 words, all right.